Ladies and gentlemen, it's 9:15 and in the interest of everyone here, I think we should start. I'm Pierre Noël. I'm the Sultan Hassan Al Bolkiah Senior Fellow for Economic and Energy Security at IISS. I'm based in our Asian office in Singapore. And I'm pleased to chair this session. The session is titled a strategic assessment. Energy, a strategic assessment. Of course, it's going to be more elements for a strategic or elements towards a strategic assessment. We cannot, of course, credibly commit to a comprehensive strategic assessment of the energy landscape, and we had to select a few important moving parts in the global energy system that are relevant for the global economy and for international politics as well. So we chose three topics for the talks this morning. Russian energy in China and Asia, North American unconventional hydrocarbons, of which which have already been mentioned actually several times in the proceedings so far, including by John Knight yesterday evening. North American unconventional hydrocarbons in global perspective is the second topic, and climate change policy and climate change negotiations in the new energy and geopolitical situation and dynamics is the third topic. So, in conferences organized by foreign policy think tanks, the energy session is usually the Middle East and the Caspian, and I think it's usually because it's usually the types of regions that foreign policy and geopolitical analysts are interested in, but these are not necessarily the most critically important or critically relevant or interesting to analyze from a global energy perspective. So among the topics we could have chosen but actually decided not to choose, we could have had talks on the oil market, which is somewhere between unexpected US supply boom and renewed security risks in the Middle East. We could have, of course, had an entire session on the potential impact of the Ukraine crisis and the sanctions on Russia on European and global energy markets. We could have had something on the energy resources and maritime territorial disputes in Asia, and we could have also delved into the risks and potential and promises of energy exploration and production in the Arctic, especially sitting here in Oslo. And because of the many interdependencies in the international energy systems, some of those topics will actually be alluded to by our panelists in their remarks and be addressed also in the discussion that will follow. But let me give you a brief explanation about the rationale for choosing the three topics that I've mentioned. Russia-Asia on the one hand, US-Asia emerging energy relationship on the other hand. A lot of those are relevant mostly for natural gas exports, trades, and industry. And so they are at the heart of the golden age of gas discussion, or the gas promise, as others have said, discussion, and especially the competition between gas and coal, which has global environmental implications. They are also at the heart of the global economic and energy rebalance towards Asia, at the heart as well of the strategic competition between the US and China in Asia, and finally they are at the heart of the energy rationale for great power cooperation and competition in the new century. So you will agree with me that this is more than enough to justify spending time on those topics at the IISS GSR conference. International climate change policy and negotiations, I think, is also a very important moving part in the system, because in principle, of course, addressing the risk of dangerous climate change could have or should have dramatic impacts on global energy markets and industries, should transform the way that energy is produced and consumed. In practice, however, it has changed little so far. This is because national policies have been either inexistent or very modest. But the fundamental reason why national policies have lacked in ambition is because of the failure to agree on a broad formula internationally to share the economic burden of addressing climate change in a way that would be acceptable to all the key parties involved. So there are three important questions, I believe, at this juncture. And I think they are the following, and Billy is going to, and other panelists as well, are going to help us answer those. So 5 years after Copenhagen and 1 year before the Paris conference, is this negotiation going anywhere? Are governments making progress towards a workable and effective global policy architecture for addressing climate change? And the second question is, if not, then can we identify ongoing technological advances or energy market dynamics that might make it much cheaper to reverse the trends in global greenhouse gases emissions and therefore make policies less of a condition, of a prerequisite to make meaningful progress? And then, if not, and that's the third question, then what does continuing failure on climate change mean for international relations, for domestic politics in major power, and for the future of energy industries themselves? This was my introduction, and I think it's high time for me now to hand over to our panelists. We'll do it in this order. Xavier Chen is going to cover Russian energy in China and Asia, and Mr. Tadashi Maeda will then give us an Asian and particularly Japanese view on the global impact of North American unconventional energy supply boom. And finally, Billy Pizer will cover the climate negotiation and its relationship with the new energy and geopolitical dynamics. So Xavier Chen is our first speaker. Xavier is the president of the Beijing Energy Club and the president as well of Statoil in China. The Beijing Energy Club is a very original and very interesting initiative that Xavier took, nearly 10 years ago now. And the club gathers very high-level decision makers in China with industry representatives and from time to time invited guests from the wider world. And the club addresses the most important energy and environmental policy issues for China, but in a global perspective. Before that, Xavier worked for another oil company. I'm not sure we're going to mention it. We could. He worked for BP for, I think, nearly 10 years. And before that, he was at the International Energy Agency in Paris, where he was first working on Chinese issue and then more in management positions as well. Xavier, I'm extremely pleased that you could be with us today, and we really look forward to your presentation. You can either speak from the lectern or from where you are. If you speak from where you are, use the microphone.
I think to mark a difference from yesterday, so I will speak from the podium. Otherwise, this nice podium is never used. So thank you, Pierre, for your kind introduction. So in this session of strategic assessment of global energy, I was asked by the organizer to talk about the role of Russian energy in Asia. So I speak on behalf of the Beijing Energy Club, although I work for Statoil. So if you want to have any attribution, so please use my Beijing Energy Club title. So I discharge John Knight from Statoil responsibility for what I say. The topic, Asia, is very big. You know, Asia covers very vast area until Bosphorus. 95% of Turkey is also Asia. But I believe that Pierre wants me to talk about Asia in the sense of Northeast Asia, in particular China, Japan, and Korea. So Northeast Asia is a net energy importer, relying heavily on external energy supply. Japan and Korea rely almost entirely on external sources for their oil and gas supply. China today relies on 60% of its oil consumption and 30% of its gas demand on external supplies. So Asia needs energy, particularly clean energy. And nearby Russia has substantial energy resources to supply, not only oil, gas, but also coal and hydropower. Yet, despite the demand-supply complementarity and the geographical proximity, energy link between Russia and Northeast Asia are pretty weak. In 2013, Russia exported 4.7 million barrels a day of oil, the majority of which went to Europe, and only 0.5 million barrels a day went to China, 0.3 of which is through the export pipeline, the branch line. So these Chinese oil imports from Russia is only 9% of total imports, 5% of total Chinese demand. The same year, Russia exported 205 billion cubic meters of gas, and only 15 billion cubic meters of gas went to Northeast Asia, in particular Japan and Korea, in the form of LNG. Only a few cargoes of LNG went to China. China is thirsty for gas to clean up the heavily polluted air. But so far, no single Russian gas molecule has arrived in China by pipeline. A few, I mentioned about by LNG in cargoes. So one may ask this question: why is the energy link between Russia and Northeast Asia so weak? So let's look at how Russia energy exports to Asia. There are essentially two ways. The first is through the globalized energy market for crude oil, for products, and also for LNG, where Russia is a very, very important supplier. The second is physical dedication, either through bilateral contracts or pipelines. So energy trading between Russia and Asian countries is through essentially global energy market. Only recent years have seen the development of dedicated trading with China. Russia has traditionally been shipping crude oil to China through railways. Only through the big $25 billion loan for oil deal in 2009 did the Russians agree to build this ESPO, the East Siberian Pacific Ocean oil pipeline, with only a spur line to China. So discussion on that pipeline took 9 years. The pipeline has been operational since 2011, delivering 15 million per year of oil to China. Also, it took more than 10 years for Russia and China to finally sign the $400 billion deal to build the East Siberian to China gas pipeline. So this is part of Russia's Power of Siberia project. The gas deal aims to bring first Russian gas to China by 2018, starting 5 billion cubic meters a year, gradually ramping up to 38 billion cubic meters a year for 30 years. The construction of the Russian side of the pipeline started 1st September, we saw Mr. Putin and the Chinese Vice Premier attended the inauguration. And also Chinese side said they will commence, they will start the construction during the first half of next year. So besides China, two other most geographically close recipients of Russian oil and gas are Japan and South Korea. However, the territorial disputes between Russia and Japan concerning the Kuril Islands or Northern Territories diminishes the prospect of pipeline connection with Japan. Similarly, the unpredictability of North Korean regime makes Russian pipeline connection with South Korea unlikely in the near future. So Asian countries have been living without direct pipeline energy supply from Russia for many decades, and they can continue to do so in the future. So Russian energy trade with Asia is essentially through the global market. Bilateral dedication only involves China. So far, only 15 million tons a year, accounting only for less than 5% of Chinese total oil demand. So dedicated trading is set to grow with construction of new pipelines, but it remains marginal. Even if the whole power to Siberia gas pipeline comes to full operation, the 2025, 38 billion cubic meters a year, for example, this will account for only 8% of Chinese projected gas demand by 2025. As Russian energy to Asia is mainly through the global market, Russia will have to compete with alternative sources of Asian energy supply. They include domestic Chinese energy resources such as cheap and abundant coal, Central Asia oil and gas, for which pipelines were already built, well ahead of Russian. And also, they have to compete with LNG from Middle East, from Australia, and in the coming years, from North America, both US and Canada. Of course, the East Siberia and Far East Russia has a great advantage of geographical proximity to the Northeast Asian market. But can this geographical proximity turn into price competitiveness against alternative sources of supply? Can this improve the security of supply in the consuming market? These two questions need to be answered clearly and positively before the Russian oil and gas can arrive massively in the Asian market. We talked a lot about Russian-China gas deal, which was signed in May this year. But please do not forget that 4 pipelines, 3 are already operational from Central Asia to China. The first Turkmenistan gas pipeline to China was operational in December 2009. The second parallel line was operational in October 2010. The third pipeline became operational in May 2014. And just 1 week ago, on 14th of September, President Xi Jinping visited Tajikistan, and he opened the Tajikistan portion of the 4th pipeline from Central Asia to China, the Line D. So Central Asia pipelines will bring a total capacity of 85 billion cubic meter of gas to China when they all become operational. So last year, gas volume from Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan to China was 27 billion cubic meter, plus a little bit from Kazakhstan. Even Myanmar to China gas pipeline was built at a record speed and became operational last year. Russia sits on the vast, the world's largest gas reserves, but it is late in global competition for the Asian market. So that's the first point I want to talk. And second, let me turn to another issue. Yesterday, people talked about Russia's pivot to Asia. And energy is an important part of this Russian pivot to Asia strategy. The rationale behind this is very simple. Growing Asian demand against the declining or stagnating traditional markets in Europe. From Asian perspective, this is welcome. The strategy is sound, well-intended. The question is how to turn this into reality. This requires the formulation and construction of concrete oil and gas and electricity exports projects. As discussed earlier, it took 9 years for the Russians and Chinese to agree on oil export pipeline, and more than 10 years for the gas export project. For the oil pipeline, initial capacity of 15 million tons a year has been already reached through the export branch line, and the 67 billion advanced payment deal signed between CNPC and Rosneft in June last year, June 2013. Rosneft agreed to increase the export pipeline export volume to 30 million tons a year, so double the existing volume, to supply China additionally 7 million tons a year of crude through Kazakhstan to China oil pipeline, and also to supply the proposed Rosneft CNPC Tianjin refinery in China with 9 million tons a year of crude throughout the refinery's life. Altogether, at some point in the future, Rosneft will need to supply 46 million tons of crude a year to China, almost 1 million barrels of crude per day. So one may ask this question, does Rosneft have the capability to supply these almost 1 million barrels of crude today against the declining oil and gas production in Russia? Gas pipeline is not a done deal yet. Contract was signed, but uncertainties abound regarding both the financial and engineering capability of Gazprom to deliver the gas development of gas fields, to build the processing plant, and also to construct the pipeline in time for 2018 delivery. The risk of delay is particularly high under the current geopolitical conditions surrounding Russia. Discussions are also ongoing for the possible export of Russian hydropower from East Siberia to China. There are also other Sino-Russian energy projects, including Russian investment in the refinery and the nuclear power plants in China. Of course, we should not forget the opportunities that arise from the opening of the Northern Sea route, by which Russian crude LNG cargoes could be shipped from Western Siberia to Northeast Asia through the Northern Sea route. China does not just sit and wait for Russian energy to arrive. Chinese companies are very active globally to invest in oil and gas projects. They have been longing for investment in Russia's upstream oil and gas projects as equity partners, and they want to bring their engineering companies to do the construction work. But despite the announcement of some deals, such as the CNPC and Novatek deal for 20% of Yama LNG project, China is not yet a meaningful investor in Russia's upstream sector. The recent Russian invitation for CNPC to join the Vanko oil field in East Siberia represents an important step, but we are yet to see how much stake Rosneft would like to give and how much they would require CNPC to pay. So how to implement Russian energy pivot to Asia through concrete projects? Well, I propose to consider three things at least. First is for the Russian side to build the production capability at the supply base. Only when you have enough capability supply can you talk about pivot to Asia. For that, you need to attract international investment, including the Chinese investment. Second, to make sure there is robust financial and technological capability to execute all the proposed projects. Third, to ensure that each of the projects is economically and commercially viable, including their competitiveness in the consuming market. So to conclude my remarks, I will summarize two messages I want to leave. First, despite the supply-demand complementarity and geographical proximity, Russia will have to compete with other supply sources for the Asian market to add value through security of supply and economic competitiveness. Second, Russia energy pivot to Asia is a sound and well-intended strategy, but a number of critical factors need to be in place, starting with Russian domestic investment conditions to boost oil and gas output, to ensure sufficient financial and technological capability to execute concrete projects, and to make sure that each individual project is commercially viable and firmly anchored in the consumer market. Most of these factors will be required anyway if Russia is to remain its status as a global energy supplier. And furthermore, global oil market works as a pool. Where Asia takes a bigger and a bigger portion, so one cannot artificially deprive one part of the pool for the benefit of the other part. So from an oil market perspective, pivot to Asia does not make too much sense. For the gas market, with existing Qatar and Qatar supply and future North America supply, to both Europe and Asia, one may expect to see the emergence of a global LNG market. So Russia gas pivot to Asia plays within this context of global LNG market. So this context has implications not only for the global LNG suppliers, but it also has a big implication for Russian gas projects to Asia. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Xavier. And you ended on the perfect topic to help me for the transition to the next speaker, who will precisely concentrate on the global, but especially Asian implications of North American hydrocarbon exports. So Mr. Tadashi Maeda is our second speaker. Mr. Maeda has a very distinguished career as a top civil servant in Japanese international economic policy. He has advised, I think, 2 prime ministers. His current position is Senior Managing Director at JBIC, the Japanese Bank for International Cooperation, which is the Japanese government's arm for financing projects of, let's say, broader Japanese interest around the world, and energy, natural resources, and infrastructure is and has always been a key activity of JBIC. Mr. Maeda is ideally placed to help us understand what is going on in North America. But for a change, we're not going to look at it in terms of what it means for North America and for the US, both economically and strategically, but look at it from an international perspective, what it means for key energy consumers in emerging and actually developed Asia. Mr. Maeda, the floor is yours. You can speak from here or the lectern.
Thank you, Pierre. It is very much a great honor to be here. As Dr. Daniel Yagin of the Cambridge Energy correctly referred to, taking a look at energy outlook of the decade starting from 2010, two historic events happened. One is obviously shale gas revolution in North America. Two is a devastating nuclear accident in Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in 2011. And these two events by the accident happened almost simultaneously. On the first on shale gas revolution in the US and Canada, potentially these shale gas from these two countries are going to deliver the 290 million tons of LNG in the long run. And 20 million tons of LNG capacity is now under construction in both countries. The advantage of the United States as a market is the United States has a nationwide gas pipeline network. Therefore, that risk in association with upstream gas has been reduced, mitigated substantially, so that the U.S. shale gas, E&P, and also a touring of a liquefaction plant can gather the capital from the international marketplace. On the contrary, the legal framework of the United States on the gas exports is based upon that very old-fashioned regime, which is the Natural Gas Act of 1938. So that according to this legal framework, in order to export natural gas to the United States to non-FTA countries, it is required to get the license from the DOE, Department of Energy. And because of this shale gas revolution, the landscape in the U.S. energy market has been substantially changed. If you recall, that the campaign of the presidential election in 2010, the energy independence was agenda. But now, the U.S. is going to be a net exporter of natural gas by 2020. So that landscape has been significantly changed, almost 108 degrees changed. On the Fukushima Daiichi's nuclear power plants, its impact to foreign countries, immediately after this devastating accident happened, Germany shifted its policy on nuclear towards a zero nuclear policy. However, many of the countries still be very active to construct and deploy the new nuclear power plants, in particular in China, India, UAE, Turkey, Vietnam, Finland, Bulgaria, Jordan, and Lithuania. Therefore, despite this nuclear accident, now if the safety is assured, that more and more nuclear power plants is going to be constructed. And it is quite obvious that without the contribution from the nuclear industry, it is hard to achieve the goal of the climate change to reduce greenhouse gas emission. Therefore, the government in Japan, after this accident, in particular the Abe administrations, stated that in its basic energy policy, nuclear remains a very important, vital source of the fuel to the power and as a middle-based energy source. And with regard to the negative impact of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant to domestic marketplace with Japan, so far that the nuclear power plants, we have 50 nuclear power plants domestically, but none of them are not restarted yet. So this is, had been shut down for the regular test and not be able to be restarted again. As a result, the share of fuel sources of power generation in 2013 and 14 is of LNG, the share is reached to 50%. It means that excessive imports requirement of the LNG is roughly 20 million tons of LNG. So different from our dependency on oil in the Middle East, the Japanese imports of LNG are more diversified. Indonesia, Malaysia, Western Australia, Qatar, and most recently Russia. Russia is now number 4 ranking the exporter of natural gas to Japan. Only one source, which is a Sakhalin-2 project. Sakhalin-2 project, its proven reserve is a 17 TCF, and it's now produced 10 million tons of LNG per annum. And out of 10 million tons, Japan, the offtake, the 6 million tons of LNG from Sakhalin-2. And this excessive demand and excessive cost of the importing the LNG is enormous. And this is the main reason that now Japanese shape in a balance of payment has been very much exacerbated. Roughly in 2013, the cost of the additional procurement of LNG is 1.9 trillion yen, is 17 billion US dollars. So, it is not less likely to restart a substantial portion of nuclear power plants for the time being. Maybe 2 or 3 nuclear power plants in the western part of Japan is going to be restarted within this year, but still, long way to go. Therefore, this is vitally important for us to reduce the cost of LNG. Therefore, now Japanese companies, both utilities and trading companies, invested in US and Canada shale gas. And in the US, the Japanese companies invested in 4 projects, which are the Freeport LNG Train 1, Dominion Coal Point, Cameron, and Freeport LNG Train 3. That capacity of this LNG altogether is 4.3 BCF per day, and out of 4.3, that's 3.4 BCF per day are going to be exported to Japan. But the timing of the delivery of the US shale gas will be in between 2017 and 2018. So this is by accident, it's the same time frame that now Russia can supply the natural gas through the pipeline to China. So on Russia, as Dr. Chen referred to, we have 2 possible alternatives. One is a pipeline gas, the other one is LNG. We have taken LNG from Sakhalin-2. Pipeline gas was considered almost 10 years ago. But my understanding is this would not materialize, not by the reason of the territorial dispute, mainly. It could be as one element, but not major element. The major element was a regional monopoly or the utility company in Japan. But as a result of this Fukushima accident, this power sector system is going to be changed. The most recently, Ministry of Economy and Trade and Industry, METI of Japan, announced to make the substantial change of power sector. In 2 years, the power generation sector and transmission distribution are going to be unbundled. So that this will make the significant change of the market activities of Japan. Now, on the U.S. shale gas, the development, that problem of the U.S. shale gas is how to deliver the U.S. shale gas. If it is delivered to the west coast of the United States, it is very economically viable, but it is very less likely to export the U.S. shale gas through the west coast. Therefore, that is going to be delivered through from Mexican Gulf mainly to the Panama Canal. It means that it will have additional costs around $2 per million BTU. So it's a very substantial cost. In this regard, the Canadian Canadian shale gas export is relatively advantageous. But however, the shale gas is also some problem. One is a so-called First Nations issue, and also the scarcity of labor, and the tax issues in Canada. And in this regard, the new development, I expect the possible development and export the natural gas from Alaska, state of Alaska. But the timing of this state of Alaska's export to the Asian marketplace is not to start until the 2023. So that is still a long way to go. And Russia, as I said earlier, that we still have some opportunity to make the pipeline gas. If the market, the domestic market arena in Japan is going to be changed, and more competition and entries of the new companies to this sector may be likely. So that we still have some chance, but the question is from where the gas to go. So that if this Sakhalin 3 project is going to develop, there is one possibility to deliver the natural gas, not to LNG, but to the pipeline gas. It is my personal view. It is not Japanese government view. On lastly, I'd like to touch upon briefly on coal. This is issues related to the compatibility between a reasonably cheaper energy and the reduction of greenhouse gas emission, climate change issue. The President Obama's climate change action plans set the threshold in terms of the emission of greenhouse gas, which is 500 grams of CO2 greenhouse gas per kilowatt hour. There is no scientific justification why this threshold is 500 grams of CO2. Why not 600 grams? But this means that any conventional gas fire power plants, this emission of greenhouse gas emission is under this threshold. And any clean coal, like ultra super critical or coal to gas, its emission of greenhouse gas is above this threshold. I don't say that this is a manipulative, but the outcome is very clear. Now, the United States government, and along with the UK, proposed to the OECD Trade Directorate Export Credit Group to put a ban on the public financing to the project whose emission of CO2 is above the threshold. But in my view, is that this is very too narrowly specifying the issue. The CO2 emission is not only from the coal fire power plants. The transportation sector also the big source of emission CO2. The government in Japan already made a commitment to provide funding for reduction of greenhouse gas by $16 billion for the funding. So that we are very much concerned about the emission of CO2, and we're going to contribute to reduce. But this policy made by the President Obama's action plan is too narrow and too unbalanced, in my view. So at the same time, the US and Japan have been jointly collaborating by using a new technology, which is CCS, carbon capture and storage, to utilize for enhanced oil recovery in the state of Texas. So this is a good example, but still, the CCS technology, even though this is very cutting edge, but its cost is very expensive. So that for the commercial use, that it needs some sort of subsidy. So in a nutshell, there is some impact of the strategic impact for geopolitical issues such as a sanction on Russia would make the significant impact, even the risk of disruption of the gas supply to Europe. And the Asian pivot by President Putin started, but there's uncertainty a lot, like Dr. Chen said. So now we have to keep an eye on what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maeda. Once again, you helped me with the transition by ending on some CO2 and climate-related issues. Just want to put aside so that we can maybe come back to it, this idea, which I think was implicit in your remarks, that there is an interaction between the emerging Russia-Asia gas relationship and the emerging US-Asia gas relationship. There's a market interaction, obviously, an economic one, but I suppose there's also a geopolitical interaction, and we may want to go back to that into the discussion. But first, we will hear from Billy Pizer. Billy, I think, is a great example of this wonderful American tradition of back and forth between top scholarship on the one hand and public service on the other hand. Billy has the highest academic credentials that one could think of, but he also served two administrations, the George W. Bush administration and the Obama administration, in various positions at the White House as an advisor on energy and climate change, and then at the Department of the Treasury, where he had a senior position overseeing a lot of the work of the US government in international energy and environmental policy affairs related to the G20, the International Energy Agency, and other fora. He also had a very direct implication in developments of some of the key elements of the US recent energy and environment policy. So there might actually be a debate with Mr. Maeda on some of the issues that he touched upon. But Billy is back to academia now, and is a professor of economics and public policy at Duke University in North Carolina. We are delighted that you could join us today, Billy, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pierre, and really thanks to all of you. I'm kind of honored and privileged, I feel, to be here talking to you at this forum. I was asked to spend a few minutes talking about developments in global climate policy and the likely effect on future energy trends. And I think it's a particularly good time to be talking about these things, given world leaders are gathering in New York next week at the urging of the UN Secretary General to talk about climate change. And as Pierre noted, we are in the middle of a march towards a new climate agreement that is supposed to be finished in December of 2015 in Paris that will govern greenhouse gas emissions after 2020. So I think it's a good time to be talking about this. I don't think I'm saying anything novel or particularly clever when I suggest that the heart and soul of the new agreement is going to be domestic policies, along with some sort of mechanism for transparent reporting. The negotiating process itself is actually calling for countries to submit what they call intended nationally determined contributions in the next few months, which is kind of a fancy way of saying that every country writes down on a piece of paper exactly what they plan to do from the post-2020 horizon. The important thing is that there's no aggregate emission limit that people are working off of. There's no effort to twist people's arm to really do more than what they are willing to do. All the countries simply write down their intentions. So this leads me to 3 points that I'll try to make relatively quickly. The first is, while I say it may seem obvious that in an international agreement people are just going to agree to what they're going to do, and that it'll come up from national policies, this was not really the case for a long time. And it was really, as Pierre alluded to, in Copenhagen 5 years ago, that there was a real turning point, and we basically embraced this sort of a model, I think. The second point, also Pierre alluded to, is that without working from a international goal, an overall emission limit or temperature target or something like that, there's no guarantee that we're actually going to avoid serious consequences from climate change. As a matter of fact, it's pretty clear we probably won't. And that has some important implications that it's probably worth spending a few minutes talking about. The third point I'd like to make, perhaps slightly in contrast to something Pierre said, is I do actually think there's a lot of significant things happening, policies that are in effect in different countries to try to reduce emissions. And while it may not avoid serious consequences, it's certainly a lot better than nothing. So the first point is that 5 years ago, there was this real turning point in the debate over climate policy, where we shifted from what you might think of as a top-down model, where you have a global goal and you figure out how to divide it up among countries, to more of a bottom-up model where countries just bring their offering to the table. The reason for this is that the Kyoto Protocol was a top-down model. This was the agreement that was signed in Kyoto in 1997. The Kyoto Protocol basically took an emission target out of the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is kind of the granddaddy of all the climate agreements. And that agreement suggested 1990 emission levels as a target, but didn't really do anything to enforce it. The Kyoto Protocol took that target and divided up among countries and said each country had to meet a target based on 1990 emissions. So this was why it was perhaps on people's minds that we would just do this Kyoto Protocol top-down model going forward. But there was a pretty deep flaw or two in the Kyoto Protocol that kind of go by the name of China and the United States. One of the flaws was that the Kyoto Protocol, by construction, did not include any developing countries in its obligations, including China, which perhaps at the time it was drafted or a little bit before didn't seem a huge problem because those countries were not a significant part of global emissions. But now, of course, developing countries are the majority of emissions and all of emissions growth, and excluding them would be a real flaw. But not only was China and other developing countries not part of the Kyoto Protocol, but the United States had actually walked away from the protocol in 2001, partly because China was not in the agreement, but partly because it was just, it was not a really good deal for the US, and we could talk about that if people want. But on the eve of Copenhagen, when we were supposed to be figuring out the successor to Kyoto, it's not surprising people had this in mind. Maybe they thought that China would change its mind and would embrace the Kyoto architecture. Maybe they thought that the United States, with a new president and a Democratic Congress, would ignore the fact that China wasn't part of the agreement. But certainly anyone that was close to the negotiations would tell you that this kind of top-down agreement just wasn't going to happen again. And instead, the only real possible practical solution was a bottom-up agreement where countries like the US and China could put their commitments on the table. This could be enshrined or stapled to a piece of, a front page, and that would be the agreement. And then there'd be some sort of mechanism for revisiting or ensuring or looking at how people were actually performing. But even that sort of a bottom-up deal was far from a clear outcome in Copenhagen. And so let me just spend another minute talking about that. When leaders, so in Copenhagen, 120 leaders showed up for the last couple of days. And when they arrived, there was not even a piece of paper on the table. There were 2 years of negotiations that had completely failed. There had been a kind of behind-the-scenes effort by the Danish hosts to craft a compromise agreement, but days earlier, someone had leaked the text, and it had become kind of toxic to everybody, so no one could actually associate themselves with it. So the leaders arrive, and there's nothing on the table, literally. And over the course of 10 hours, on the Friday before the end of the convention, 28 leaders among the 120 sat down around a table in a room about a third the size of this one and hammered out a 4-page agreement that is now the Copenhagen Accord. And this has this framework of people submitting their contributions and reviewing them. And I just want to reflect for a second. I was there in Copenhagen, and I had kind of 2 reactions. One was, thank goodness, because it's really bad if your president shows up and you don't have anything and everybody's embarrassed. But the second reaction was, wow, if 2 years of negotiations and the pressure of 120 leaders showing up yields a 4-page agreement that is a bottom-up agreement, that's a sign. That's probably what the foreseeable future is going to be about. And we shouldn't imagine that there's something that's more achievable. So I think that hopefully defines for you why this idea of a bottom-up agreement and national policies are going to be at the center of a new deal in Paris. But it leads me to my second point, which is climate change is going to happen, and it could be bad. If you believe the work of thousands of scientists that have been participating in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, you would say that probably based on current trajectories, we have at least a 50-50 chance of exceeding 2 or 2.5 degrees of warming. And that means changing precipitation, changing weather, more storms, rising sea level, less Arctic ice, which I guess is probably maybe a good thing we've heard. But a lot of changes that could mean increased risks and volatility for a lot of governments and businesses, ranging from instability and conflicts to trickier insurance claims because you can't predict storm impacts. Another real risk that perhaps we'll talk about is you could imagine countries that are particularly vulnerable, small island countries, trying to take matters into their own hands and turning to some sort of effort to dump iron in the ocean or aerosols in the atmosphere to try to geoengineer a solution to climate change. And I think those risks are potentially quite real. But my last point, because I don't like to end on a negative one, is that an expectation that we might hit 2 degrees or exceed 2 degrees with a 50-50 chance is a lot better than 5 degrees. If you look at the central estimate from the International Energy Agency that came out last year, their new policy scenario where you take everything that's on the books and add the things that people have announced in a very cautious way, what they suggest is that over the next 25 years, half of new electricity generation will be renewable energy, which I think if you imagine asking this question 10 years ago would not have been your forecast. But we don't even have to look into a crystal ball to see that this is happening. Last year in China, half of the capacity additions were non-fossil generation. In the US, also in China, there have been announcements that they may try to put a cap on coal or actually have their emissions peak. It'll be interesting to see whether those announcements come out next year. But in the United States, as was just mentioned, we have regulations on power plants that were announced. Mr. Maeda focused on the new power plant standards, but actually the existing power plant standards are poised to reduce emissions by about 30%, and the administration is promising more announcements in 2015 as part of the negotiations. Now, these events are being facilitated by technology trends, lower prices for wind and solar, the natural gas expansions that have been talked about quite a bit. But they're also fundamentally motivated by policies. And we can talk a bit more about that. But in my mind, there have actually been pretty significant policy actions, maybe not as much as some of us think the problem warrants, but enough to make a real difference and affect energy trends over the coming decades. So I think that's good, and at that point, I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Billy. I had questions to the panel, but I will withhold them because we are a bit late compared to what we had in mind for the timing. So I will take questions from the audience. Please, yes, let me. So I've got Mr. Sorry if I mispronounce your name, Mr. Zhang, Kong, Xiao, James, in that order, and then a second round, please. So. The microphone. Oh, no, you have microphone. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. My question is goes to the first two speakers. Northeast Asia is short of energy. So the price in Northeast Asia for natural gas is almost double the price in U.S. We have the $15 or $16 per unit compared to the $4 or $6 in the U.S. So could we learn from the Europeans? They have the energy integration policy. Could we establish such kind of policy or take some actions as build a natural gas trading center in Asia, for instance, in Shanghai or in Singapore, as our chair stationed there? Do you think it's possible? Thank you.
If you don't mind, we'll take the first four questions, and then we'll treat them as a whole. So, yes, you were second, Cho Kong from Shell.
Cho Kong from Shell. My question is to Dr. Pizer. You characterize the international negotiations as a move from the top-down approach of the Kyoto Protocol to a bottom-up approach, and you point out that progress has been disappointing. I would actually argue that we haven't really seen a true bottom-up approach, and that is why progress has been disappointing. We will only get movement by governments when they are pressed by a popular momentum pushing them to act. Now, we might well see this popular pressure rising up as a consequence of climate change impacts, but do you see a set of circumstances, and if so, what might these be, on getting effective action as a consequence of popular pressure on the key players on climate before serious climate change impacts happen?
Thank you. I don't remember who was the. I named four people who had questions, so they have an interest in recognizing themselves. But Mr. Xiao.
Thank you, Chair. My questions go to Dr. Chen and Professor Pizer. Dr. Chen mentioned shale gas productions in the United States and its long-term impact on the global energy trend and supply. I'm just wondering whether Dr. Chen can shed some light on China's shale gas reserves, estimates, production schedule, and in particular, since we are talking about the strategic assessment of the energy globally, how it will impact on the Russian supply if it is still being contemplated in the plan, and also that you mentioned the Russia's pivot to Asia versus Francois' reference to China-U.S. relations, and given the U.S. willingness to share technology on shale gas, whether that would be something that China will have to make a decision, and ultimately it will probably be the Chinese choice to decide how to do this. But ultimately, what is the long-term energy position for China? Would that be something like a reduced dependence on imported gas and imported oil, and eventually reversing China's position in the energy market strategically also? Thank you.
Our last question before the first round of answers, if I can say so. Mr. James.
Would the panel discuss what is so strategic about oil? Oil has always been available to any buyer, except in a world war, at a price determined by world supply and demand. Big oil, OPEC, so have not been able to control oil prices. Taiwan, Korea, Japan, EU seem to be able to exist without owning their own oil. Why is it so strategic?
Well, I think you made the question and the answer. So perhaps Xavier, you can start answering the questions that were touching upon explicitly on your topic, and then Mr. Maeda and Billy Pizer.
Yeah, I will address these two questions. The first question about oil trading. So the purpose of oil trading is to discover prices, or gas trading, you mean. If you count on trading to lower down the prices, it's a very long expectation. So the U.S. share revolution brought down the gas prices. Remember, only perhaps 5-6 years ago, the share Henry Hub was around $12 per MBTU. So thanks to the shale gas revolution, and the supply of U.S. gas went up tremendously. That brought down the prices. Similarly, also in Europe, given that Qatar gas, North Africa gas, Russian gas, so you have lots of choices. And Asia is essentially a supply-demand issue, and also historically, LNG trading is linked to JCC, the crude oil prices. So when you have these crude oil prices very high, and then LNG is essentially to compete with crude, so gas price is also very high. So trading is a good thing, increase the liquidity of the market, but will never solve the price, to expectation to low prices. Second, on this Chinese shale gas situation, the number of things. On the positive side, that China has a lot of shale gas resources. Larger part of the resources were not proven. To prove a shale gas reserve, you need to do a lot of drilling. So not a lot of drilling done, so there were only estimates of resources. Second is that the quality of the resources might not be as good as the US, because they are buried very deep, and they are in populated areas. They are in mountainous areas, and also in areas that lack water for fracking. And then thirdly, the infrastructure pipeline in China is not in place, whereas in the US you have, everywhere, big amount of pipeline already in operation. Fourth, the Chinese share gas belong to the state, whereas the US share gas belong to individual property owners. So in the US, the biggest driver for share gas revolution is number one, technology breakthrough. Number two, most importantly, is the private land and mineral owner that have strong incentive to, monetize their reserves. So for the Chinese share gas prospects, there will be some share gas produced. China has drilled around 100 share gas wells, and then assessment is ongoing to see how much this share gas will cost. My guess is that this cost will be very high, even with government subsidy. Is unlikely, to be very competitive at the big volume. So in short, the US share gas revolution is difficult or cannot be replicated in China. But it's also, you said, it's a very good thing that China and the US should work together to bring the US share gas technologies and adopt the US Western technologies to the Chinese circumstances. So I think counting on share gas for changing China's energy landscape is, I would say, we should not have much expectations. There will be some share gas, but cost will be very high, limited.
Thank you. It's an important message. Perhaps, Mr. Maeda, we really would like to hear you about the question about gas hubs and the commoditization of gas in Asia.
Yes, before that, why oil is strategic. Two reasons. Oil market is very advanced, but its pricing is not decided only by the demand and supply. It's in some of the speculation in the future in the foreign market is one of the reasons of the high up and down of the oil price. Two is the gas prices in Asia is an oil index. Therefore, that's from our viewpoint. Originally, that oil and gas is a different commodity, but there's some reasons that a JCC Japan crude cocktail, the oil index pricing formula has been prevailed in Asia marketplace. So that in order to make the gas market more flexible and more competitive, we have to go towards a more commoditization of the gas market. For example, that the long-term offtake contracts requires a destination clause. We have to eliminate those clauses and to make more flexible cargo swap and the trading deal in the marketplace. And we may invite more the participant to the gas market, not just only utilities or a trading company, like oil. And on a half idea, I think that it could be achievable. Most recently, even Japan, that it's announced to create an exchange market of LNG with some collaboration with Chicago Mercantile Exchange. It will start the trading in middle of September. So it is a very baby step. However, that because of our effort to make the markets more competitive and more transparent, eventually that trading of the LNG in some hub, for example, Singapore, Shanghai, Tokyo, whatever, it will be achievable.
Thank you. Billy, you had a precise question from Chokong.
Yeah, the one about the how do you get popular action? Actually, let me just say one thing before I answer that question. I didn't want to leave the impression that a bottom-up agreement is completely useless or completely weak. I mean, putting one's commitments out there in public does create a higher burden of obligation to try to fulfill them than not having even said anything. So I think there is something there. And it's also worth noting that in the negotiations, the huge emphasis of the United States had always been on some sort of transparent reporting mechanism. And the reason wasn't because we wouldn't know what was happening. I mean, we had a really good idea of exactly what everybody was doing, as people now know. But the concern was there wouldn't be a public record of that or some sort of credible public record of that. So I think the structure of the international agreement is actually important. But the question was really about, do we really have a bottom-up agreement if we don't have popular pressure in countries to take action? Is there any way for that to happen before there's really serious consequences? And I think to answer that question, you really have to go country to country and ask that question. And I can kind of speak to the United States because I've been very closely involved with that. And in the United States, I think it actually speaks a little bit to what Pierre said in some of his introductory remarks. There is a unwillingness to, there's a concern about the problem, but there's an unwillingness to spend tremendous resources to deal with it. And so one of the important developments has been efforts, ranging from shale gas to solar panels that have lowered the cost of achieving emission reductions. So you kind of have costs going down and hopefully concern rising, and eventually you're able to do more serious domestic policies. We were very close to passing a cap and trade regulation in 2009 that would have put us on a very steep downward trajectory in our emissions, but it was a political failure at that point. So I do think more political ambition is possible domestically in the United States. I just think we have to solve some of our current larger political issues. And I'll just note that in China, the big driver seems to be domestic air pollution, which is not completely coincident with reducing carbon dioxide emissions, but certainly will help. So I think there are important domestic forces, but they just have to be harnessed, and they're going to be different in each context.
Thank you. I want to take two quick questions, one from Jeff Mazer, one from John Knight, and then we really have to take it to a close. Jeff.
Thanks, Pierre. In your introduction, you mentioned the Arctic, and it came up in a couple of times during the presentations. So I wanted to ask a question that bridges the first two speakers' presentations. The reason that the Arctic is becoming a new strategic space is really because of energy issues. Something like 20% of the estimated undiscovered oil and gas resources in the world are in the Arctic, but that's about the same percentage of current production coming from the Arctic. So with the advent of the shale gas revolution, there's a potential to actually reduce the importance of the Arctic in global energy production. On the other hand, as a number of people mentioned, in the next 2 to 4 decades, we're likely to see the Northern Sea route opening to the extent that it will become a significant maritime trade route, not just for Russian exports, but, for example, for Norwegian LNG, it shortens the distance to Asian markets by 50%, and there's a possibility of Canadian oil and gas pipelines to ports in the Canadian Arctic. So the question is given these two countervailing trends, one of which will reduce the importance of the Arctic, one of which will increase the importance of the Arctic, what do the speakers think the net balance impact will be on the strategic importance of the Arctic from an energy perspective?
Thank you very much, Jeff. John Knight.
Could I just press Mr. Maeda a little more on Asian gas price formation? Because there's a lot of geostrategic, geopolitical good that would come from US gas exports. That's why partly why they look at the issue. But I think the main pressure is economic pressure from the producers. They don't want to export LNG in order to sell it at Henry Hub, $4 a unit. They want to export it so they can get to the world price, which on average in Europe is about 10, and currently the average the last few years in delivered to Japan, I think, has been about 17, although it's a bit weak at the moment. So, could I ask you, what do you think will be the really big developments or big steps that will lead to a significant reduction in LNG into Northeast Asia? Because you described the trading hub as a baby step. Xavier said that Chinese shale questionable in terms of price pressure. The Russian import quite small in the scheme of things. Destination clause is a bit technical. What are the big steps to bring this price in order?
Okay, I have to intervene here. I think we have two complex questions, and Xavier Chen is going to address the first one, Tadashi Maeda the second one, but please, gentlemen, give only, I would say, introduction to your answers and keep the substance for the coffee break. So Tadashi Maeda, your coffee break is with John Knight, and Xavier Chen, your coffee break is with Jeff Mazo, because otherwise I'm failing in my job of keeping the time. Thank you.
Very good. I think energy in the Arctic is a myth. I would say interesting Arctic is not about energy per se. Arctic is very large. If you really look defining Arctic in the narrow sense, it's really not about energy, but it's about say shipping, about climate change, about all other aspects. But I think also, when we enlarge this Arctic a little bit to the Barents Sea, and the biggest challenge is actually how to make sure that the oil and gas exploration in the Arctic can be secure and environmentally safe.
Thank you very much. That was short.
So a short answer is that one element is that still the long-term offtake contracts has now valid right now. Therefore, that for the off-takers, if it's going to the new contract on it with a U.S. shale gas, they have to make reference to the existing pricing. Therefore, that the changing the pricing formula from the existing ongoing one to the new, basically on the Henry Hub basis, will not be changed so quickly. Therefore, that there now we need a more kind of set forth an environment to make the arbitrage between the spot market and long-term of the contract. We need to facilitate those kind of arbitrage can work. And also that we need to encourage those players like utilities to change the mindset to be more rely on it in the market discipline in the marketplace.
Thank you very much. I hope that we succeeded in showing that a strategic assessment of energy has to look at the complex interactions between geopolitics, markets, and policy. And to the extent that we succeeded, we owe that to our three speakers. So I want you to join me in thanking them, and then off to coffee. That's good.